let's get started. So today's art workshop is about UVs and texturing for 3D models. We're going to talk about UV best practices and texturing strategies. So like all of the workshops that we've been doing lately, this is more oriented towards beginners or people first getting started with 3D modeling. So I'm not going to get into all of the technical nitty-gritty little things that you'll probably have to learn if you want to do a lot of UV modeling and a lot of texture painting. We're just going to do an introduction to UVs and textures. Okay. So first off, what are workshops? Our art workshops provide intro-friendly courses to creating art for video games, software tutorials for beginners in 2D and 3D. We're focusing on 3D now until the end of the semester. A space for one-on-one help with artistic growth, and a community of artists for support in your journey. Make sure to follow our Art Workshops Discord channel so that you can stay updated whenever we're having one of these. Okay, let's talk about 3D modeling in Blender. So in last Blender workshop, we focused on the first steps of 3D modeling. We talked about concept art and gathering references, blocking out your model, modeling and sculpting, and retopology. In today's workshop, we're going to be talking about UV unwrapping, baking, texturing and material design, and lighting and rendering. So first we're going to talk about getting started with UVs, an introduction to what they are and how they work. What are UVs? They are coordinates that map a 2D image onto a 3D object. And they're called UVs because instead of X and Y, which are already taken up by the positioning of a 3D object, they use U and V for the axes. So this is an image to explain how a computer takes a UV map and applies it to a 3D object. You can picture a UV map as a flattened painting that is then wrapped around whatever object you've created. And it is what lets your object look actually real. And the ways that you define the different types of materials that are on your object are going to influence how fake light, bounces off of it and makes it look like it has dimension. Okay, so what does this look like on an actual character model? So here's an example of a character who has a UV map. So on the right, you can see, On the right, you can see how the different parts of this character have been cut up and laid out, and then later they will be painted on or materials will be designed around them and they'll be re-wrapped around the character. Here's another image to help you wrap your head around what exactly UVs are and what they're doing. You can imagine it like a flattened map that the computer then wraps around the object. So all of these places where there are cuts, these have been decided by the 3D artist. A 3D artist had to go in there and actually manually mark the seams in Blender so that Blender would then know how to cut up that map and lay it out for the UV map. So seam design is something we're going to talk about and something really important to making a good model. So I know I'm talking about this a lot, but it is a little hard to picture when you first get into it, so I think it's important to give you a lot of visuals. Think of 3D model UVs like the peel of an orange. You can cut up the outer skin or peel of the 3D model, flatten it out, texture it, and then wrap it back up around the object. Okay, so we just talked about what it is. How do we do it? A few simple steps to the process are you're going to prep your model for unwrapping, and you're going to plan out how you might want to cut seams or divide up materials. You're going to then mark the seams on the model, so choose the sections of the model that you feel like you could carefully hide seams in and would look natural when you reassemble it from that orange peel state. Step 3 is unwrapping, which is actually cutting the object along the seams and then flattening it out. And your final step is going to be formatting your UVs. Let's talk about prepping and planning. When you're ready to unwrap, and we're talking about in Blender, so I'm going to give you some Blender hotkeys here that might help you out. You first want to apply your scale. You press Control-A, apply scale to prevent distortion. So the reason that you want to do this is because otherwise you might have issues in your unwrap with having your model have transforms already applied to it. So you want to make sure that you're evening out its scale and transform so that you aren't going to have any distortion. You want to decide how many materials you want to use on your model and what type of map you're making. So is this for a game or for a movie or for something else entirely, a personal project? If it's for a movie, you might have a very large budget with the amount of memory that your character and then its UV maps can take up. So you could have plenty of texture maps. You could have a bunch of textures that are specifically applying detail to just the decorations on the character's outfit, and then one for the face, and then one for the body. But for a game, especially a lower poly game or a game that needs lower amount of memory taken up by a character, you need to be strategic with how much space you're going to allocate to your UV map. So the quality of the map, like how high in pixel density that you're going to make it, and also how many different parts you want to have their own texture set and UV map, is something that you need to decide and think about in advance. So the amount of UV maps on your model depends on how much memory you can afford to spend on this asset. So when I was looking this up and researching to make sure I had all this right, one person was saying that a hero model in a very high quality game would probably have about 5 maps. So you might have the top, bottom, limbs, weapon, and decorations and materials on the character. But in a lower poly game, you might just want to have one texture set for the whole character, but it might lead to pixelation if it's too low quality. Okay, this is something that we talked about last workshop, but it is super, super important to bring it up now, because when you made your model, assuming that you're following this amazing step-by-step process, you are now facing the topology that you made is something that you have to contend with and deal with. So in the process of modeling, you always want to consider topology. It's especially important for game props and animated objects. With good topology, your shading is going to work correctly, and it's going to have the least amount of faces needed to achieve your goal with as many quads as possible. So when we first talked about this, it might have not seemed super clear why this was important, but now you're picturing you're going to have to cut up those seams for that orange peel. It's going to be way harder to cut up something like that image on the left than the image on the right, because the image on the right is going to easily be divided up into eyes or eyebrows or hair and flattened out. And we're going to talk about common topology errors again. So ingons, like polygons with over 4 sides, they're going to lead to shading errors in this process, so you want to avoid that. You want to stick to quads. Triangles are bad, again, stick to quads. Quads are easier to edit, they shade predictably, and they can subdivide easily. And then duplicates and slivers, which are extremely small polygons or vertices, edges, or faces that have accidentally been duplicated or stacked on top of each other. So all of those things are common topology errors that could lead to rendering issues when you're in this process of creating the UVs and then material design and texturing. All right, so you've planned out your model, you're ready to go, you're now going to mark your seams. Go slow and steady. You want to strategize and picture your final model as a real 3D object. Think about you're a fashion designer and you're making a pattern to make some sort of dress. You want to make sure that everything is going to fold up nicely on that final product and match the flow of the curves around the object. So on this model, they're choosing to cut the head like this. It's cut in the back and along the crown of the head, because those are places that they don't think are going to have distortion. Most likely, they're going to cover up that head with hair, and then it's not going to matter that there are seams there at all. So to mark a seam in Blender, you select the edges that you want to mark in edit mode. You can hold Shift to select multiple at once. And then you press Control-E, mark seam, and then it's going to have this red color on it, and you can go through and mark all the seams on your model. This is a similar process for marking sharp. So you can mark certain edges as sharp in Blender, and then they're going to be rendered as if they're a sharp edge. And that's in the same place right by the seam. So you can actually put a lot of seams along your sharp edges. That's a really good place to put them, because it's not going to show distortion too badly if it's not a curved surface, if it's this hard edge, because you're going to have it painted or material designed different anyways. Okay, marking seams continued. Like I just talked about, seams can leave distortions on your final model. You want to hide them where the player and viewer will not usually see them. So when it is rendered, you might see unusual edges, and I've seen this in games before, and I bet you have too before, where there's a wall and there's just a little bit of a weird line down the wall, or on the floor or edge of an object, there's a weird line. That was a seam that didn't blend properly. You especially see that in older games. Because of these distortions, it's better to have less seams than more seams. Resist the urge to cut everything. In this example, you have a really well cut up model. You can see that on the right side, you have each section divided into what it is, and you can actually tell what each piece is just based on the shape of the UV map. The one on the left is going to be kind of a nightmare to texture paint because you're going to have a ton of seams in the end, and also it's going to be really hard to keep track of what is what. Okay, so here's an example of a model that's being texture painted. You can see that it's been cut up along seams at the bottom of the cap and down the stem. And on the left, you can see the texture map that's being actually painted. And you can visualize, because you can see it on the right, exactly how that map is wrapping up around the 3D object that was created. So in the process of designing seams for 3D models, it's really important that you're picturing your final product and how you want it to look in the very end. If you're going to have sections that are different colors, like on this mushroom, you've got the red cap and then you've got the yellow stem and base of the mushroom. In this case, you really aren't too worried about a seam along the edge of the cap because it's going to be divided between red and yellow. Things like that are really important to think about, and that's why you have that planning stage. Okay, unwrapping. So once you have all your seams marked, you're going to cut those seams and actually unwrap the object. To unwrap an object with marked seams, you press A in edit mode to select all, and then you press U, unwrap. You should see your new UVs on the left side of your screen. So unwrapping, there are a lot of different techniques and strategies, and if you go online and watch YouTube videos and tutorials about this, you'll find all sorts of different techniques. One type of technique that I was shown by a professor in a class is a camera-based unwrap. So in a camera-based unwrap, you might have, we did it on a wheel of a car. You would move your camera in the scene to face the car, and then you would camera-base unwrapped part of the car, and it would almost take a picture of the wheel from the perspective that you're looking at it, and then lay out the UVs in that order. So in cases like that, you might use different types of tricks for it. I think it's something that you learn a lot more with practice. When I first started unwrapping, everything looked really weird, but the longer you work on it and the more models you unwrap, the more you start to realize how things can unfold. The process is really unusual, and if you're coming from a background of 2D art, it's not like anything that you've done before, so it's a little bit difficult to wrap your head around at first, but as soon as you start to grasp it and figure out how you can mark seams and cut seams and lay everything out to look nicely, it can become a little bit of like, okay, it's relaxing, I'm just going to sit here and UV cut for an hour. It isn't too stressful. So once you've unwrapped, you're going to see your UVs on the left side of your screen. So this is a map that they made here. They cut up this cylindrical object, and they actually stuck the cube also on this same texture map, which you can do. On the cube here, it looks like they've divided up this outer rim of the top cap of it first. So they probably marked seams along the top and then along the bottom of that cylinder. And you can see that, I'm going to just move over here to show you. You can see that like on this curved shape that was the top of that cap, they had to cut a seam down it. So on this model here, they had to cut one of these lines here, probably whichever one they think might face the back in the final model. And then the reason for that, hello? News? Why did my Windows News pop up? Dude. Okay. It's like only stuck on the right side.
Try Alt F4.
I don't want to close Twitch. Wait, 1 second. That's so weird. It's like only popped up on the right, so I can't close it. Yeah, this is really funny. Oh, hey, it left. Okay. Yay. News break. We're interrupted by news in the middle. Okay. Unwrap. To unwrap an object with marks. Okay, I already talked about this. But what I was saying is that you have to cut a seam along a shape like that because otherwise it's going to be distorted. So that's something I ran into when I first started doing this. If you have a cylinder with a band around it and you try to unwrap it, it's going to be warped so that it's smaller in the inside and really wide on the outside. You can imagine like pressing it flat and distorting it. So you need to cut a line along the side of it. On large cylinders or large like circular shaped objects, you're always going to need seams down the back to cut it open and then lay it out. Yay! Okay, now you're going to apply Auto Checker, which is an auto built-in Blender texture that allows you to check UV alignment. I bet you've seen this before if you've looked at anything involving 3D modeling, but it is that black and white checker texture that shows up. It also shows up on transparent BNGs in the back. If you see distortions on your object, once you have that checker texture out, it makes it really clear wherever anything might be wobbly or distorted. This is your chance to correct them. Once you get into the texture painting and material design process, you're not going to be able to change your UVs easily anymore. You're going to select UV, average island scale in the Blender UV editor, and automatically size your UV islands to be the same relative size across your model. So there's reasons why you might not want to do this on a model where, I think on that human model we saw before, the face took up more of the texture map than anything else, even though it was a smaller part of the model, because the face is going to be somewhere that you want to have more detail and more quality. But in general, especially on materials that are environment assets or environment assets or building assets or prop assets, it's going to be really important that all of the different parts of the model are the same amount of quality. And that's called texel density. So different objects in a scene and on just one object if it has multiple UV maps want to have similar texel density so that you aren't going to have a single portion of an object or of a character that is way higher quality. If you don't do this, like average out your islands, you might end up with a case where Blender automatically made the bag on your character's hip take up a huge part of the UV map, and after you texture paint it, everything looks fine in the texture painter, but when you actually bring it back into Blender, your character is going to have super pixelated everywhere except for this super high quality bag. And that's a hard thing to fix in the end, so make sure to check that. You can also manually move and resize UVs, so that person that made that human, they probably used an average island scale for everything, and then on the face and head, they probably upscaled that because they wanted to have more detail there. Here are some examples of objects that actually have the checker texture on them, and you can see how it distorts and warps along them. In the top right, you've got a scene with lots of different objects, and you can see how the checker texture looks a little bit different on all of them. In the bottom right, that's an example of a distorted texture. So if you unwrapped the one on the left and then you found out that you had that kind of UV map when you looked at it, you would definitely want to try to correct it so that all those squares get really even. There are a lot of tools inside of Blender to allow you to position your maps well or to make sure that they're lining up nicely and geometrically. I'm not covering them all here because Blender hotkeys are a whole adventure that you'll probably want to learn at some point, but there are ways to snap your UVs, there are ways to align geometric edges, or if you have square or rectangular shaped UVs, make sure that they're lined up with the natural lines inside of your UV texture. On the far left, you have a more complicated UV map. This was probably a bit of a pain to UV unwrap, especially that bottom section. But you can see how they want the texture to warp inwards. So anytime you apply a texture to this object, it's going to actually warp along that base of it. So it doesn't have to have completely geometrically even squares on the bottom right to be UV unwrapped correctly. This was like by Blender, this one on the left. Okay, when you've got your UV map out, you want to think about padding. Padding is the space in between your islands. So here's a section of a UV map, and you can see that everything is spaced just about evenly from each other. So this one looks like maybe a 2 pixel or 2 to 4, a small amount of difference between each object. And that's going to make sure that when you texture this, there isn't going to be bleed over. So the problem with having everything really close together or touching is when you paint it in, let's say that you're doing it in Substance Painter, because that's the most likely place that you'd be doing this, or perhaps in Blender itself. if you're painting like a character's shirt and it's directly on top of or next to the hair or a different part of the character, that color is going to bleed over. This is why you also can't have UVs on top of each other, because the computer doesn't understand each section of the character model or how they work. The computer just knows that you're giving it this map, and it knows, okay, I'm going to stick this part on this section because that's what you've told me to do. So if multiple were stacked on top of each other, it doesn't know about layers. It's just going to apply like a tire texture of a car to all over the car instead of just that one section. There are different recommended padding sizes based on your overall texture size. So for smaller sizes, you don't have to give it as much room. And in larger sizes, you want to make sure to give it a lot of room. Padding is a feature that is inside of Blender's UV map editor and creator. And you can set your padding to a different level and then apply that when you generate your map. Okay, now we're going to have a quick note on baking. Baking. I do think that baking is really fun in Blender because they have this cute little croissant at the top, and that's adorable. Okay, baking allows you to save bake information about your model that you can then use in Substance Painter or elsewhere to help with your material design or your texture painting. Baking is basically creating maps related to the contents of a 3D object. So I'll explain maps in a second if you haven't been into them before, but they can be used to actually have information about the different sections and shape and which direction it's facing of your model in your material design. Baking can also apply to high poly to low poly baking. We talked about this last time, but I'll really quickly explain it because it's really important for game assets in case you haven't touched on it before. High poly to low poly baking is designing two different models of different qualities of whatever object you're trying to create. Let's say that you are making a stone carving for a wall. Your low poly model is probably going to be just a big rectangle, right? Or a, what is it called? Rectangular prism? A rectangular prism. It's not going to have any detail on it. It's just going to be that. But then you're going to make the same thing, same size, but it's going to be high poly. You're going to spend hours carefully carving an intricate mural into this object. Now, in a game, you can't have enough memory to use high poly models for everything. In a film, it's not really a problem, but in a game, which is what you're probably making, because this is EGADS, you're not going to be able to make that all the time. So instead, you take your low poly model and you take the high poly information that you bake from the high poly and you apply it to the low poly, and then it looks the same. You can't tell them apart when you look at them side by side. So this is a really cool trick that like all the big games use, and it's how they make their games performant while still looking super high quality. Baking other than high poly to low poly can also just be used to generate maps that will be helpful in material design or texture painting, like a normal map, an ambient occlusion map, a thickness map, etc. In high poly to low poly Substance bakes, you want to let Substance generate the maps. So what I mean by that is that if you're using Blender and Substance Painter, you're not using just Blender, you're using Substance, you want to do your high poly to low poly bake in Substance Painter because it's going to generate better maps that are going to help you more with your Substance Painter material design or texture painting. Okay, types of maps. These are not all the types of maps that exist for 3D objects, but these are some that I think are important to know about and to talk about so that you know how you can use them when you're making a 3D model. A normal map is this really pretty colored purple, green, and a reddish pink map that's going to give your program information on how all of the faces of an object face different directions. So, for example, with these rocks, that second group of rocks is what it looked like before the normal map. Then you're applying the normal map on the right, and it's giving you the rocks on the left. So a normal map is actually the trick that's going to make your low poly bakes look like your high poly bakes. You're taking the normal map of the high poly, other maps as well, but the normal map is the one that makes the big difference, and applying it to that low poly, and it's going to make it look like there are all these little sections of your object that are facing different directions and bouncing light as if they were a 3D modeled object, even though it's actually just flat. An ambient occlusion map is going to create soft shadows and in pockets and folds of your model. So this is an example of a human head with lots of wrinkles, original without ambient occlusion, and then with ambient occlusion. it gives it this softness and like realism to the shadowed areas and pockets of your model. And it's something that on some models you might not notice it at all, or there might not be enough detail or folds to really have it make a difference. But on more detailed models, it can really bump up the realism or the quality. An albedo map is just the base color map of your object. So on the left, you just have a base color, no texture, no detail applied. And on the right, you have it with an albedo map that has a variation in the color in different sections on the object. And it gives it a higher level of realism and lets you have different colors on your model. A metallic map is going to create this shiny metallic effect. It'll get darker and more reflective the higher the metallic quality is. So a metallic map might be really helpful if you were modeling an object like a character's jacket and it has a zipper on it. You would make the UV section that's the zipper have a really high metallic level on your metallic map, but the rest wouldn't. And it would all be on one UV map. So instead of having to create a metal material and apply it to all the pieces of the zipper as if they were individual objects, you can just on your UV map have that section of the character and object have metallicness applied. A roughness map is almost the opposite. You can see that it's from the same graphic as the metallic map is from, but you're going to make it less smooth and shiny and reflective and rougher. I mean, it's kind of in the name, but it can make different parts of your object look more realistic and reflect softer light instead of sharper light. Finally, a displacement map is interesting because it's a lot like a normal map, except it actually moves the geometry of your object. A displacement map can make your object be a different shape, and it actually moves those vertices of your object. Okay, stage 2 of this workshop, we're going to get into texture painting versus material design. But before we do that, I'd like to ask anyone on Twitch or anyone here in person if you have any questions about UV unwrapping. I will try my best to answer them. If you don't, that's okay. I don't have a lot of people in person, so no pressure. Okay. Hydrating? Okay. Texture painting versus material design. Two different really cool techniques to bringing your UV maps to life. Texture painting has textures that are painted by hand, and it leads to a more painterly or 2D art style. It's often paired with lighting or a shader that complements its style. On the top right, that cube is taken from a very cool YouTube tutorial where the creator was trying to create a cube in the style of the TV show Arcane. Arcane, if you know it, has a lot of really detailed hand-painted textures that really bring all of its assets to life. And all of this was hand-painted. So you can see on the character and on the cube that hand painting defines these different sections of color and light and shadow, and any metallicness or shininess that you see is probably not the result of a metallic map or some metallic feature that you applied to a material in Substance Painter, but instead through physically going in and hand painting little lights. It can be a bit more time consuming, at least in my experience, than material design, but it does give it a more handcrafted, painterly look in the end. So, we're super into texture paint, love it. How do we do it? Substance Painter is the leading program, but it can be done natively in Blender as well. In the image on the right, you can see an example of a character who has been texture painted. So the UV map was created and divided up, and now the person who created this character is going through and painting each section of the UV map to reflect the dimensionality that they want to portray in it. So in Substance Painter, this works really well because you can actually paint on the 3D object itself, and you can paint on the UV map if you want to. So whichever one is easier for you as you're working. You can also paint on multiple sections at once on a character. So if you had a color or a line or something that goes across multiple cut-up sections of your UV map, you can draw it physically in Substance Painter over those different sections. This can be done natively in Blender as well. I've done this before. Texture painting in Blender is a little bit more complicated because it just has slightly less features. It still works really well, and you could texture paint something amazing in Blender, but Substance Painter is going to help you out a little more. You first, when you're texture painting, are going to individually assign base colors to each section of a character. So on this character on the right, they might have defined a skin tone and then a color for the dress and a color for the hair. And that's going to give you a look at what the base colors that you're working with in your character are. This is a very similar method to 2D art, character design, painting, that some of you might be more familiar with. So this could be an easier approach point for those of you who aren't used to Substance Painter or to material design. Once you have your base colors assigned and you're happy with them, you're going to add details and refine shapes. Think about painting with large brush strokes, almost like you're creating 2D art, but you're going to think about how it looks on that 3D model. Substance Painter, again, is really great for this. They have a lot of different types of brushes that you can use that can give you different flexible shapes and options. Okay, the alternative to texture painting is material design. So material design is done in Substance Painter, usually. There are other programs to do it, but Substance Painter is the industry standard. You're going to use the features of Substance Painter to design a complicated material. Masks can cut out sections of shapes, smart filters can allow you to define the edges of shapes or apply dirt or dust, and you're going to want to reference real life a lot. So when you're approaching material design, you're going to want to think about what the texture and qualities of any material that you're creating are. So if you were creating a wood texture, you might want to think about the grain and apply filters that are going to create that result. I took a really great class in this in AET, where we talked a lot about how you can create something like a metal texture by layering a lot of features in Substance Painter. So a metal texture might have a base gray color, but then on top of it, you might have a metallic filter, and then you might have a shadows filter that's going to add little shadows and nooks and crannies to it, and then you're going to have a filter that just gives it wear and chips to look like there's paint underneath. And by building up all of these different sections and applying them to your UV map, you can create a really detailed object in the end. So on the top right, this is a bucket that someone has made. You can see how the different sections of it have been divided up into different types of materials, and then each material has been really carefully handcrafted in order to create the appearance of a realistic object. Material design is what you will want to be doing if you're actually making a really realistic prop or a prop for Unreal Engine, and it's probably the most common kind of design that you would see in like a AAA high-quality game. Leather material, so on the bottom right, I thought this was a really interesting picture here because it showed you how a bunch of different leathers could actually be slightly different from each other. So they've got a leather for the bag, a leather for the straps, leathers for the side pockets, but a material designer has worked really hard to give each one a different type of character and to make it look really realistic with the wear or the marks on the edge of it. It is a really good idea to reference real life as much as possible when you're going through this process. If you're out and about and you see a really good old worn metal texture on the back of a truck, you can take a picture of it. Later you can look at that and use it as a reference when you're working in Substance Painter. You can also just scour the internet and look for examples of it, but if you're trying to make something that's true to life, the most important thing is that you're referencing life in order to do it. Additionally, these things don't have to be mutually exclusive. They can be combined. The processes of designing materials and painting textures can be combined to create a final product that has both material-based and hand-painted sections. So these are some examples of characters that look to me like they used both material design and painting, and probably some of the best renders are going to use both. So on some of these human characters, they might have texture design, the skin texture, the hair texture, the clothing texture, but they might have gone in and hand-painted things like the scars or the markings on the head, or the irises of the eye look like they might have been hand-painted. And all of these things can be done with just material design, but I think the best method you could do would be to create materials that are going to define different sections of the character, and then physically go in and adjust maps the way you want. So you could add more edges or more dirt to the filter, or you could paint physical decals or shapes or decorations. And those are really going to bring your art to life and make it look more personalized and special instead of like an asset that you might be able to download on the Unreal Asset Store. And then on the right, here's a character that I think has a lot of hand-painted assets, but also sections that look like they've been material designed, at least as a base. Like the jeans, that looks like a denim texture to me. I don't think they hand-painted all of those jeans. They could have, but it looks like a texture to me. And then the boots and the bag at his side, those sections look like they are a leather material or texture that's been applied. All right. And it's important to remember that it takes practice. The entire UV mapping and texture painting process seems really daunting at first. When I first got into this, I thought that it was way more complicated than 2D art, and it seemed like there's no way that everyone in the industry is actually doing this entire process every time with every single model. But there are a ton of hotkeys in Blender and ways to make it move a lot faster. And the more times you do it, the more familiar you are with the processes and the more it makes sense. You're going to understand how seams work, you're going to be able to visualize 3D objects, and then when you get to the painting part of the process, you're going to understand how it should look in the end, and it's going to help you a ton. And there are a ton of awesome guides and videos to help. YouTube is a fantastic resource to get started with small tutorials and to connect with other creators. I've seen tons of great YouTube tutorials, especially focused on Blender, because Blender is a really cool free community program. If you haven't downloaded it yet, go download it. It's super cool, and I think eventually it might be the industry standard. And there are lots of Blender tutorials that focus on all sorts of the UV unwrapping and texturing process behind character design or environment art or just making simple props. And if you check those out, it's going to really help you out. Okay, next up, we're going to have an awesome demo about the UV unwrapping and texturing process that's going to be starting at 7 with Luxie, your art workshop officer. But before we get into that, do you guys have any questions? People on Twitch, people in person, do you have anything that you might want to ask or we could talk about? Does anyone have like your favorite 3D model that you've seen made before? No? Okay. I guess that's not a common thing to have a favorite of. All right, that is everything that I have planned for this portion of the workshop. If you want to stick around and wait for Luxie, she gets out of a class and she's going to get here at 7 and give her presentation and a demo. But for me, I'm going to be heading out for now. Goodbye, everyone on Twitch. I hope you enjoyed the workshop. It was really nice teaching you guys.
Hello, eGads. This will probably, I am streaming right now, but we are having this as a VOD. For today's art workshop, I am now going to be doing the live demo for how to texture a model inside Blender. I have Blender already opened up. Whenever you open up Blender such as this way, you're going to be greeted with this pop-up. You're just going to go to general file, and you should be able to access your screen here. Just a reminder for the controls of the viewport, have your middle mouse button. If you hold that down, that can rotate the camera. If you press shift and middle mouse button, you can pan the camera, and then you can use your middle mouse button to zoom in and out. Alright, so for this demonstration, we're going to go ahead and we are going to model something that, we're going to texture. I'm going to just delete this cube by pressing the delete button on my keyboard, and if I press Shift A, I can add a new object. I'm going to go to Mesh, and I'm going to add a cube, because for today's demonstration, we're going to be texturing a box. Well, not a box, a book. Okay. Since this is going to be mainly a texturing demonstration, this is a very simple model. It shouldn't take too long for us to model. You guys can also follow along in, building. So first of all, my plan for building this box, or building the book out of a box, is that I'm going to have 2 parts to the model. And I'm not going to make them 2 separate parts. I think they'll all be fine as one object. I'm going to be modeling the outer case of the book and then insetted in between the case, I'm gonna have this stack of paper. And so when I want to start, I think I want to do a mirror modifier so I can make sure that both sides are going to be of equal length and size. So I'm going to grab my cube. I'm going to go to the modifiers panel over here. I'm going to click this. I'm going to add a modifier. Just search, and it is the first thing that pops up for me, but you can also search up the word mirror, and this is now your mirror modifier. Modifiers will basically apply a quote-unquote filter. It's just like it's like a temporary filter that you can put on your model. You can manipulate it however you like, and then you can apply said filter to your model, and then it will actually like save the filter. It's like merging down an adjustment layer in like a drawing software or something. You can always come back and edit your mirror modifier, but once you press apply, you cannot go back to it. We're currently still in object mode. We can now, and we can still warp this model in object mode. But I'm gonna go ahead and press tab, which is the switch between edit and object mode. And now that we're here, I'm gonna start modeling. I want to mirror on, I believe it was the z-axis. I'm gonna have to check. I don't particularly know. To manipulate your cube, you can press G for grab. Okay, yeah, it is my z-axis that I want to mirror. We're going to first, so you can press G to grab, and then it will go from your crosshair. You can also press S to scale, and you can also press R to rotate. But then you can also have a combination of either G and then press, like I'll press G and then I can hit X to scale it from, or to move it on the X axis, Y to move it on the Y axis, and Z to move it on the Z axis. You can press the left click button to save your transformation, or you can press escape to get out of the transformation. I'm going to control Z my thing now. I'm going to go ahead and add clipping, and I think the bisect I want is at the Z axis. I think I'm just going to click the Y too. I'm going to scale this. But I'm more or less, I just prefer the gizmo in itself. I don't have to do keybinds. I can just visually click and drag things. So I'm gonna first make the back of the book that we're gonna make. This is the spine. This is the spine. I'm gonna first make the spine of the book, and then I'm going to have our loop cut tool. This Control R, which is also our keybind for it. Whenever these yellow lines show up whenever you hover over your object, you click whichever axis you want, but then you click and drag to, that's not, click and drag. I think actually, I'm gonna have to first select your cube. I'm gonna move it up because it is mirrored. And then I'm gonna press the knife tool like that. That works better. And then I want to cut it around, I'm going to cut it around here. And then, I also press Control. If I click here, and while holding left mouse button, I drag up and down, I can get the edge slide. But if I also hold Control, it'll go by small increments. And I believe if you hold Shift, you'll be able to adjust it at very precise. It becomes more precise. Okay, so I'm gonna cut it at this area. I think I'm gonna cut here, a little lower. I'm gonna cut here, and then I'm going to go to my face mode. To switch this up here, this is your vertex mode. I can select vertexes in this mode, and you see I can drag and do whatever I want with vertexes. I also have an edge mode, which if I clicked here, I can drag edges and do what I want with edges, and I can also have a face mode, in which I can grab this face, press E to extrude, and then I can pull it on the z-axis. And now I have the casing of my book. The spine's quite thick, but you can also switch between vertex modes, vertex, edges, and face modes by pressing 1, 2, and 3 on your keyboard. Okay, now that I have this here, I want to make the inner pages. I'm going to grab my cutting tool, and to pull a face in here, I want to make cuts so I can pull a very specific face. To make those cuts, I'm gonna go to my edge cutting tool, click, and then I'm gonna edge slide. I'm gonna just, yeah, we can put it here, and then I'll put another one there, and I am purely just eyeballing it at this point. I'm also going to click here. I am more or less just having my own judgment say, I kind of like it here and there and whatever. Okay, I do like this, but I think that the spine is too thick, so I'm going to press 3 to switch to face mode. I'm going to press the move tool here so I can get out of the edge cutting tool, and then I'm going to select these faces by clicking them and then pressing shift to select multiple. And then since my gizmo is already open, I'm going to push this forward. And then it will mirror it as well, but now we have a much more thinner spine. I like this. Okay. Next step for us is to actually pull this face in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, if I were to just press E and extrude this down, it works perfectly fine. But if I go into wireframe mode, the problem is that there's like faces that this is a face right here. I don't want a face in the middle. And there's also going to be like faces here. If I can select it in, it'd be difficult to select it in this mode, but if you can see the white face, the whiter face over here, that means it is like overlapping with another face. There's two faces on top of each other. I don't like the fact that there's a face here, and a face here. You're not seeing those faces, and those instances are overlapping. That is a problem. That is overlapping geometry. That's gonna ruin the view of your meshes. And just in general, it's just extra geometry we don't need. I'm currently in edge. To switch from wireframe mode, I go up here and click it, and this is going to be your smooth shaded mode. This will be able to show you your solid view. I'm going to Control Z, and instead of extruding this, I'm going to select these two faces. I'm going to press the delete button on my keyboard, and I want to delete faces. Now that we have a blank face, I also should probably delete this face here. This one is not needed. Delete this face, and then delete these extra faces in here as well. We're gonna delete these faces, and then we're going to grab your edge tool with the 2 button. I'm gonna select. If I press Alt and click, it will select the entire loop. Alt and left click will select the entire loop, and I don't want to select these because then I'm going to be, I don't want to select these two edges because whenever I pull these downwards, these faces are going to pull down here. There's no reason why there should be an extra face, and it's also it's also a 1D transformation, so there's just going to be like an extra 1D face here. Don't like it. So I'm gonna instead select not them, press E to extrude, and I can extrude downwards. I have clipping on for my mirror modifier, so it won't go past itself, but I'm gonna press Z to make sure it also scales where it moves down perfectly vertically. Now that we have that here, this is our basic geometry in our basic model for a book. Now I can go to the cube modifier. I can go to the cube, go to its modifiers. I want to apply my modifiers here, and I can only do that in object mode. So I'm going to tab into object mode, and then I'm going to hit apply. Now the modifier is gone, but now we can go to object mode, and we can select these bottom faces and then move them independently if we wanted to. For now though, this is the first part. This is our blockout stage, although this is a very simple model, which I think this is a very fine model, since it is like such low geometry. It isn't going to actually be that upsetting to your engine whenever you put it in. Our next step, however, I want to retopologize this in the sense of I want to optimize this the best as I can for demonstration's sake, and also to show how to reduce these faces into like the most minimal amount possible. Because whenever we put this in our rendering engine, trying to read this face versus this face is going to take two different calculations. I might be also inaccurate with this information, but I'm basically saying that we want the engine to calculate less amount of faces, so it has more resources to read other information in the game engine. So, first, to reduce the amount of faces here, we're going to delete all the geometry that doesn't directly impact the silhouette of the model. So as you can see here, obviously from the top view, all of these boxes, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's 9 faces here. They don't need to be there, they can all be consolidated into one. So I'm going to go into edge mode, I'm going to grab you, grab all of you. I'm selecting all the edges. I'm going to just press delete, and then I'm going to delete, oh, not faces, delete edges. Oh, okay, yeah, don't delete edges, never mind, because whenever you delete edges, it actually, like, it deletes it off of the geometry itself, or it deletes the geometry that is attached to it. Instead, you want to press dissolve, dissolve edges, which will take the edges off of the shape, but you'll still keep the shape. You can also do the same for the back side, and also for the bottom side. So I'm going to press Alt and Shift this time. It'll select the entire row here. And I am going to, I'll talk about this area, I'll talk about that area later. So I'm just gonna go ahead and delete these edges for now. I'll talk about that part separately. I'm gonna delete these faces, or dissolve these edges, not faces. And then for this back side, there's not that many edges here, so I don't feel too much in need of keybinds right now. Dissolve my edges. And now, I think this edge in the middle doesn't constitute anything to the actual geometry itself, so I'm going to select the entire thing. I can also probably select these edges right here. Dissolve edges. There you go. And now we have a relatively simple model. The thing is now, I would say, is that we have a lot of, or actually, I'm gonna delete these edges here to finish our first step of deleting all edges that don't directly help the model itself, or yeah, the silhouette itself. It doesn't actually support any faces or edge. I'm just delete them, like finish those edges off. Dissolve. Alright. Now that we're here, this is a very, very simple model, and obviously we have much less faces, and it's still the same silhouette. Now, before me check, go into wireframe, check my vertices. There doesn't seem like any floating ones. Everything looks like they're relatively connected. There are a few. Okay, I did miss a few of these edges here, so I can just dissolve these edges like that. And then, yeah, it looks like everything looks good, I believe. Alright. So, now, obviously this is like the most simple our model can get, but the problem with this model right now is that there are multiple n-gons. N-gons are faces that have more than 4 sides. Whenever you have a model, you want to have their face count be 2 or less, and your model should be mainly full of like quads. There shouldn't be that many triangles. Sometimes you do need to use triangles, but you want most of them to be quads. And why do we prefer quads and under? It's because whenever you put these objects into engines, they will automatically triangulate. They'll turn every single face into triangles. And if you have a five-faced face, and you want the computer to triangulate, it's going to have a much more difficult time. Obviously, with squares, you just divide them in half. Like pentagons are going to be difficult to divide into perfect triangles, and because of it, it sometimes like ruins the mesh itself. For consistency's sake, we want to make sure that this is not in that sense. So to identify the n-gons, we can clearly see one that's right here. We have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 faced side, and so to imagine we can try to put this all into quads, we're going to use the knife tool. We can either cut like this, or like this and that, this that way, and then yeah, like basically put quads here. And I mean, that is a valid way of doing it. But the problem with this is that it's very unoptimal, because now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 faces. Sure, they're all quads, but there's a better way in which you just simply cut it like that. Now you have 3 faces instead of 5, and they're still quads. They're all 1, 2, 3, 4 sides. We're gonna do that on the other side as well. We're just gonna directly cut this with the knife tool, vertice to vertice. Make sure I actually get the vertice. They should snap on, so you should be able to like very much tell if you're hitting it or not. And then there's also n-gons with these areas, and simply hit them with the knife tool with these edges. Like so. And now your model is the most simplified, with the least amount of faces, with the cleanest amount of topology that we can possibly get. Before we start unwrapping this, I am going to select all by pressing the A key. I'm going to press M to merge, and I'm going to merge the distances, make sure that there are no overlapping vertices. There are no overlapping vertices, which is good for me, and so that means this is a completely flush object with no overlapping faces, no overlapping vertices, and no overlapping edges. I also want to press Shift N to recalculate the normals, because normals, whenever you put them on a face, normals themselves are the direction your geometry is facing. This face here, this normal should be pointing upwards. This normal here is outwards. I'm just making sure it recalculates it, because if hypothetically this face here was facing inwards, whenever you put them in rendering engines, this entire face is going to disappear, and that face is only going to be viewable if you look at the back. It's some weird clipping things. Just make sure your normals are facing outward, incorrectly. I pressed recalculate normal, so everything should be flipped on the outside now. And last thing you need to do here, we're going to press A. I'm going to go to object mode, and we're going to shift, okay, not shift A, control A, and then apply scale to make sure that there's no overall warping whenever we get to the UV editing. All right, part 2, UV actual editing. I'm going to open up the UV editing tab in Blender, and this is our UV tab here. It currently already has our object here. You can select faces, it'll respond as such. And whenever it comes to UV unwrapping, our goal is to flatten out our object, flatten out all of the faces, and we're trying to minimize warping, or not even have warping. Don't have warping and minimize stretching of the model. Before we actually start unwrapping this, I'm going to create a new texture, a temporary texture, to make sure that our model here is not distorted. I'm going to create new in this area. There's a upper tab in this UV editing area. Press new. I'm going to call this UV checker. Okay, and yeah. Okay, I'm going to press UV checker. We don't need an alpha. Alpha is also the transparency of a texture. We don't need that. We're going to keep that blank. We're going to generate a UV grid and then our new image, like that. This is our UV editor. Our UV editor here will show us, we're going to first need to apply this texture to our object, and then once we project this on our object, it will show us how our texture is warping on a possible texture map. To apply the material to the object, I'm going to press the material button. I'm going to add new material, and I'm going to go to this base color, image texture, and we already created this image texture. It's called UV checker. You can press this button, it'll show up right there, and now it's applied to your object. Currently though, you don't see the texture because you're in the wrong viewing mode. If you go up here, we have the wireframe mode, we have the solid rendering mode, but we also have the material preview. This preview will obviously show you what materials are currently being projected on every object, and then this one here is going to react to light that you have in your scene. Like this point light that already was generated by Blender, it'll start reacting to that. We have darker here, lighter here, because the point light is up there, yep. We're only going to really need it in our texture editor mode, and clearly you can see our goal is to have these squares not warp at all. Currently, you can clearly see that these squares are being stretched slightly on the right ways. And not only that, there's a lot of compression here, there's a lot of stretching. This doesn't make sense at all. It looks terrible. So obviously the point now is to start UV unwrapping this properly to make sure the projection is correct. So I'm going to first select all here, and I am going to go to, where is my, okay. Oh shoot, did I forget how to do it? Maybe I need to first create a UV map projection. And I need to use Control A? No. Oh, I forgot it. I forgot the button. Hold on, chat. Cut this part out. I think it's UV. Okay, there we go. It is. I remember it now. It is. You go to this UV tab in the editor mode, or in the layout mode. Then you go project from view, and then it'll directly project your model onto the UV texture map. Obviously, you can now see and understand in comparison to the other one what our model and what other scenes there are on it. But obviously, because it is a camera projection, it is still bad warping. Now we're gonna go ahead and start cutting up our UV. First thing for cutting up UV, if I know an area in my texture is going to have a different color, I'm going to separate it and cut it out. I know that the inside of my book will be a different color, so I am going to cut this middle pages, like the middle area book, the one that's going to hold the pages, out. I'm going to go into edge mode, and then I'm going to click left alt. I'm going to select the entire loop up here, and then I'm going to press shift and then alt and then down here, and it'll select both of them because shift is to continue your selection, and alt is to select the entire loop. I'm going to shift click these last two areas. I'm going to left click mark seam. Marking seam is basically cutting our seam up. Now, if we select our object in our UV editor, we press unwrap and press we still have a few connecting seams for some reason. Still have a connecting seam here. This is an error because okay, no, never mind. I got it. So to select the islands in your UV editor, also let me see if I can get this UV opacity. The opacity is kind of difficult to see. Black or white? Okay, white is easier to see. Those are just settings for the guides. Now that we have here, we have a separate island here. I can press L to select the separate islands. You can also press G to grab it and move it around. But clearly now, this area is perfect. No warping, no nothing. But now we have to deal with the outer shell of the book. And how to approach this book? I would say the person next to me would probably be like, I'm gonna just cut everything at every single seam that I see. I'm going to go to my edge mode. I'm gonna select here, select this entire seam area. I'm gonna cut this area out. I'm gonna just go ahead. I'm gonna mark that seam. I'm gonna also cut this area out. Select the entire loop here. I'm also gonna cut that out. And then I'm going to select everything. I'm gonna just press A. And then unwrap. And now, oh my gosh, easy enough. We have so many nice. We have this perfectly nicely unwrapped. And honestly, it looks great. Like, it looks perfect, amazing. But the problem with this is that whenever we UV unwrap something, whenever you get to more complex shapes and complex objects, there's going to be a lot more things to unwrap, and more or less we're trying to optimize the amount of coverage. We want to maximize the amount of coverage we can get out of our UV image, so we can put more different things into one texture map. Currently, it looks very beautiful, but I think that we could probably optimize this much better because maybe maybe we have some kind of external detail here, and then when we unwrap that, there's not enough room to have everything unwrapped nicely. because also we could also shrink these if there's like an extra element here we wanted to unwrap. We could shrink these, but then it would decrease uh, the quality of our texture, in which you're just making the detail of our book smaller. Ultimately, we want to find the path of most optimal when it comes to maximizing the space we have in our UV texture. So instead of cutting it this way, I'm gonna Control Z, undo all of my seam marking, but you can also select seams and press clear seam. It'll just re-sew it back together. I think the way I want to approach this box is I'm gonna select these edges, these wing edges that are on the book. I'm going to mark these as seams, and then I'm gonna select you with L, I'm gonna unwrap you, and it looks a little funny, but I think if you remember, our old UV unwrap took up this much area, like it took up 75% of the map. Now, if I were to press L to select this entire thing, I'm gonna just grab you out of the way, and then I'm going to unwrap. This unwrap feature does have a little tab under here that you can edit. Currently, our method is angle-based. You usually want to do angle-based for like a bunch of complex and warping objects, but because we have a very linear piece, it is very like straight geometrical, I'm going to instead do conformal. And with conformal, let's select you. I'm going to move you across the way, and we have a very, maybe not that, but I would say that at least the internals look very straight and very nice. Let's see what I can do about this. Okay, I will also say that I'm gonna select all, and when I go to this guides area, I'm gonna just click on this UV stretch. UV stretch is just like a visual filter to show you where your UVs are stretching. Blue is no stretching, and then it scales to red, which is extreme stretching. For UV unwrapping, you want to minimize stretching, but most of the times we cannot avoid it. So for here, I can definitely tell that these edges here, let me select this face. Yes, clearly you can tell that this face is very much stretching a lot, and if I want to avoid that stretching a lot, I think I want to do more cuts around it. So I think since we have like these wings that we cut up, I'm gonna cut more wings here. I'm going to cut 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to do it on the other side, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I'm going to mark these seams, select the entire object, and I'm going to unwrap it. Why don't you look at that? Gorgeous. Beautiful. Almost no stretching. Literally, basically no stretching. This is the most, although this is a very standard cube, it is very easy to unwrap. This is the demo, so it is very easy to unwrap. But this is the most optimal way of unwrapping this object. And also, if you remember from our previous unwrap, the one that is okay, it looked as good as this. Problem is, it took up so much more space. And then this time, this object that was actually that was minimized to this size could take up so much more room, and we have so much more areas here. This has the maximum amount of area it could take, while also leaving enough room for more details. This is the best quality our texture can be. And So we are now done with unwrapping this object. Because we are done with this object, it's time to texture paint. I'm going to be doing a demonstration on mainly texture painting. We're not going to grab textures from outside. We're just going to be doing simple painting and also a very minimal understanding of painting. So, this is number one. This checkered pattern isn't our actual texture itself. It was temporary. It was just to make sure we can see that our object is not warping in any sense. And so, I can just select this material, and I'm gonna just minus it out. It's gone. It's off the object. If it's purple, that means there's no texture assigned to it. And as of now, I'm going to actually create a new texture. I can create a new texture here, or I can just create one right here. I'm going to unlink. I'm going to create a new texture. I'm going to call this just color for now, I suppose, just good enough. And then I'm gonna have this color. I want to make maybe a blue or no, blue, or I think blue or red. I don't know. I'm honestly feeling a little bluer today. Let's make a blue book. Yeah. I'm gonna make this new image, and I'm going to assign this new image, or I'm gonna assign a new material to the image texture that we created, the color book. And now we have color here. Now we can just directly paint. We can paint on this book. And it'll update live as we paint, which I think is pretty damn nifty. So, and we have brush size here, strength here. We also have colors that you can pick from. The entire color wheel here. We also have a bunch of these paints that we can go through. But if you want to, whenever you start painting, you can press F to change the size of your brush without going up here. You can also press Shift F to, or I believe that's still size, no, okay. That's F to change the size of your brush, and it's Control F to change the angle of your brush, and it's Shift F to control the strength of your brush, like your opacity. So I'm gonna just make this a very small size, and I don't know what I want to do here yet. I'm just gonna write the word book. Yeah, it's a book. Nice. Yeah, that looks good enough. Obviously, I can actually, if I go to this texture paint, make sure I am in paint mode, I can draw directly in this area, and it will directly reflect. And if I were to turn on these guides, that's my UV map. So, as such, you can paint directly on this UV map, and it will generate directly on your projected texture. So, now that we have our book, I could do a lot more, like, drawing here. I could probably do, like, a back. Yeah, funny looking back. And maybe I want to write author. On this end, I'm just drawing, doing whatever the hell I want. And then I'm like, okay, I'm happy with that. Now I want to color the pages. And for coloring your pages, we're gonna use the masking tool. I'm gonna go out of texture paint. I'm gonna go into edit mode. I'm gonna press 3 for my face mode, and I'm gonna select these 3 faces. Then I'm gonna tab into texture paint, and I'm going to press this button, mask. I definitely did that wrong. Okay, it is selected. Go to texture map. Okay, I definitely did this wrong. Give me a second. What am I doing here again? This masking tool. Oh, what was it again? I believe it was, yes, that's this one. Okay, yeah, that was the button. So, once you select the button, when you select your faces in edit mode, you press this button right here that's called paint mask. Your selection will then be masked off, and now you can paint however you want in this masked area. I am going to change my color. I'm going to choose I'm just trying to pick like a book color, like a book page color. Okay, I'm gonna take this color. I'm gonna use this bucket tool, and boom, buckets. It's a bucket tool. And also, let me check something in the. This is, if you click here for your tool button, the tool that you're currently selecting, you can edit your parameters with it. And for us, I want to draw the pages that are in between the books. I want to draw lines. And so I'm gonna shift my color downwards. And I want to start drawing lines here. Okay, but this is clearly not like the best way to draw these lines. They're not even connected in that sense. And so I would probably recommend at this point, like even drawing like this is difficult. It starts fading off because the distance. So it's better to actually draw on the UV map instead. That's what I would recommend. But since I want these straight lines, I'm gonna go to the brush setting and I'm going to go to stroke. Stroke method. We're currently on space. There's a few different things you can do here. This is the dot one. Drag dots. And there's airbrush here. It's not really. I think you have to change a few parameters there. But we want the line tool, because the line tool, if you just pull straight, makes a nice little line. And if I want to pull straight like this, well, obviously you really are going to have a difficult time drawing like direct projections here. So just go to your UV map instead, and then just draw the lines directly here. I'm gonna I don't think we need this many lines, but I think I'm happy with how it's alright. It's funny looking. That's okay. So I'm gonna go out of masking mode, and and it's a book. I'm quite happy with how the book turned out. And now we're basically ready to import this into our engine. Whenever you export your models, your texture maps and your models are separate. They need to be exported separately. If you export your model, it will not come with the textures. So, I want to go to File. Number one, I'm just going to say, I don't use Blender file. I'm going to Save As. I'm going to go to Downloads. I have a, okay. I'm going to actually export this as an FBX. I'm going to go to Downloads. I'm going to write demo book FBX, and And our objects, I'm going to select, we're going to export all visible objects, which should just be the book. The book is the only visible thing. I think the camera and light technically are visible, but I don't think they will be exported. But more often than not, I would select my object. So actually, you know what? I'm gonna just press. I'm gonna go to object mode. It is all selected. File, export, FBX, and then book, demo, selected objects, and then everything else is okay. I don't have an animation, so I'm not gonna bake an animation in here. Everything should be okay. And whenever you export this FBX, it will not export the texture. However, if you went to path mode, press copy, and then hit this button, you export this FBX, and then when you go to downloads, I believe it should be in here somewhere. I believe this one though. No, that was my previous one. Oh, okay. I dropped it in documents for some reason. Okay, I need to. Okay, that's a bit awkward. Hey, where did I export this thing again? Yeah, I put you in the wrong area. But export FBX. This book demo FBX should come with. The book FBX should be able to come with the textures. It didn't come separately. If you do want to download the textures though, we're going to image, and okay, I will say, the star means it's not saved, and texture painting will not save if you save the Blender file. If I save this Blender file right now, this thing will not update. It is very separate. So I'm going to, you can either save, or, I mean, at this point, yeah, I'm gonna just straight up save this, and I'm gonna color for the demo, color demo, save image. Choose PNG is going to give you the most, it's gonna give you the best look. Some people do JPEG, but JPEG has issues with compression, so it is better to do PNG instead. Save image, and then if you go to downloads, the color, this will be your UV unwrap, and then this is your model that you just downloaded. Let me see if I can open up. I am more of an Unreal user, so I'm just gonna jump into Unreal and do the import. I don't particularly remember how to do it in Unity, so I'm going to see how long it takes to open up a new object or a new project in here. I'll just import it in my recent project if it doesn't really work out. Okay. Okay, I had issues with this earlier today, so it's nice that it was able to load up quite easily. File, I'm gonna open a new level. I'm gonna do a basic one. And now that we're in our level, also, I suppose if you want to learn how to navigate in Unreal, you create a new project. And then usually in a new project, I would open up a new level, and then to have a blank area here. And the controls for this 3D area is actually WASD for movement. Q and E, if Q and E is gonna do. Okay, Q and E. Okay, there we go. If you press the middle mouse button, Q and E are gonna work, and WASD work as well. Whenever you press middle mouse button. Okay. I have it rented. Not that I see. New visitor. And then, so, going in here, we're going to go to our content drawer. I'm going to import the current folder. I have my box. I think I'm just going to do a normal import. And yeah, it does come with a material. Is it the right material though? Okay, it just copied everything. It just copied the texture directly to the, no smoothing group. Oh my gosh, I didn't, hold on, export, FBX, geometry, is it smoothing groups? I think it's face. Okay, let me override that. Content drawer, let's delete. Import. Okay, there we go. Okay. With that import, I do not have any idea in which way copied onto the floor, but that is less of my concerns right now. With this FBX import, you have it does come with the textures itself. If you go to the material here as well, if you go to the material instance, honestly, I don't, okay, this doesn't look like exactly what I'm just gonna question it. Okay. Like, to be honest, I'm just happy that it imported correctly. I don't really work in Engine often, but how's it here now? You have a book that you just modeled, and now you can put it into any software you want. And if you make sure you did a copy with that button toggled on, then you should be able to have your textures come with your FBX. And if it didn't come with the FBX, you did download a separate file for textures. This one right here, you have it separately that you can also just import into your own model. Other than that, that is your very simple demonstration of UV unwrapping and texturing for today's workshop. Thank you guys for attending.